at Soto Zen Center here in Atlanta, Georgia. And you can find us online at www.ascc.org and look at our schedule, our other programs. Each Thursday night, we are interviewing a person, one of our members, our guest, somebody who is into Zen practice. And we can just feed those over to April to try to compile an inventory of folks who are participating in Zen today in the 21st century in America, why they have come to Zen practice, and what it is about Zen practice that keeps them coming back. So we think this is an important message for people to hear in general. Even though Zen has become mainstream, it's still pretty much little known or relatively unknown in the country. So we think it's important that the general public should be familiar with the different kinds of people who are coming to practice and why they find it interesting and how it fits into their life. So with that, please give us your full name. And
sure, I'm Brendan O'Flaherty.
Brendan O'Flaherty.
Yeah.
Nice. Is that Scottish or Irish?
Irish.
Irish. Nice Irish name.
Incredibly Irish. Yeah.
You have the look.
Yeah.
So tell us first a little bit about your current circumstances. You're at Emory. You're doing a PhD program. Have you completed your thesis? Is it?
I'm in the process of doing that now. I'm in the final year of my program.
And your major is, again, you've told us, but
neuroscience.
Neuroscience.
Yeah, specifically studying the link between fructose and high fructose corn syrup and depression.
Oh, okay.
In rats. Yeah.
That's a big issue these days.
Yeah.
When you do a thesis, I come from a design background, and so my master's thesis was a written one. It was about the design of a company that I was part of, a research company for new product development, and how you can interface research at every stage of the process of developing a new product to hopefully mitigate the typical 80% failure rate of new products in those days. But typically in the design schools, design arena, I was Institute of Design, Illinois Tech, Chicago. Your thesis might be an exhibit, it might be sculpture, it might be a product you build, or it might be something, a project, not so much a written. In your case, what kind of a thesis are you required to do, or is there a range of things you can do?
Yeah, in biology, and I think a lot of the sciences, the overwhelming amount of your energy is spent like actually doing scientific experiments, kind of
lab work.
Yeah, your own independent research project, and usually the overwhelming majority of experiments fail as well. So you kind of usually fail, for the first 2 years until something works, and then you take that data, you publish it in a scientific journal, and then at the very end, you kind of take all of your scientific papers and assign them all a chapter number, and that's kind of your thesis.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So each paper amounts to a chapter, essentially.
Yeah.
But they're all stages in the same project, typically.
And typically, yeah.
That's very interesting. Do you have to do a lot of technical footnoting, endnoting, that kind of thing for references to other people's work?
Yeah. The scientific paper kind of has a stereotyped structure to it, and there's a section where you cite all the papers that justify your experiments and all the methods you use and that sort of thing.
I'm just wrapping up a manuscript for publishing, and for the first time I've had to go through the Chicago manual style to figure out how to do all the footnoting and everything. It's really quite demanding in itself just to pull it together, let alone to have done the work.
Yeah.
So that must be very stressful for you.
I use a program that helps manage all that called ZENtalk. So yeah.
So it's a scientific paper publishing documentation program.
Yeah, you basically just input all your different citations into a program, and it helps you pull them out and automatically generate the list at the end. It's not
That's
too
great.
bad.
Great. Yeah, I'm using Word. I don't love Word, but I'm using it.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into that line of work. And Tom, can I ask you to bring me the clock? How did you get into the neuroscience? I mean, what was your first inkling of that would be what you'd want to do?
I took a psychology class in high school and I liked it. I started to get kind of serious about neuroscience in college. I've always been attracted to the study of the human mind, I suppose,
Mhm,
which is really the same reason I'm interested in Zen. It's
mhm.
kind of the same problem from two different angles.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. How you see the connection with Zen?
So Zen is pretty similar to scientific research in a number of ways, just because it's very, you're not measuring anything when you meditate, but you are observing, and you're observing very carefully and kind of noticing the patterns in your own thoughts. And Zen is very evidence based in the conclusions that it draws, and very, careful to avoid dogma in any way, which is, science is pretty.
But the reason it's considered unscientific is it's first person evidence,
Right.
which is essentially testimony, right? The kind of evidence you would have in a court, which can sometimes be backed up with documentation, as we're seeing on TV these days. But tell us, did you grow up in this area? Right?
I grew up in Chicago.
Well, you grew up in Chicago.
Yeah,
so
outside.
How did you come to Atlanta?
For graduate school.
At Emory.
Yeah.
Yeah. And before that, you were an undergrad where?
Up in Wisconsin, a tiny little college called Lawrence University.
Oh, that's a beautiful area of the country, though.
It's very cold, but yeah.
So, when did you first hear about or get interested in Zen?
So when I was in undergrad, I started to, it was through, my neuroscience literature, basically, hear about meditation. People were starting to do MRI studies and things like that. And so, it appeared to actually have physical changes on the human brain. And that was very interesting.
We participated in one, in fact, at Emory.
Yeah.
The young Italian professor was doing there, where he put us in the MRIs and we'd meditated and they wired us up, and it was pretty interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah. So that was when I first heard of meditation. Zen specifically, I kind of encountered in grad school with the, Alan Watts has some lectures online, and I started listening to those. I thought they were interesting.
And so, take us back, think back to when you first came to the Zen Center. Was this your first experience in actually joining a group, practicing meditation physically?
Yes.
With a group and so on?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what brought that about and what your first impressions were. You can think back to that first time.
Yeah. It was a little bit strange in the beginning, I suppose. There's a different way of doing things here, I suppose, with the, we bow here, which nobody does outside of the ZENtalk. We chant certain verses, before and after Sunday service, for example. I didn't quite know what that was about.
Had you ever gone to church before?
Yeah.
And they were singing hymns and things. Did it seem that different from that?
It's similar in some ways. I was brought up Catholic. I no longer identify as such. It reminded me of that in certain ways. But I'd kind of developed an aversion to organized religion just at that time in my life. And
I always ask people, what do you want, disorganized?
Yeah.
You come to the right place.
Yeah. But so it was a little bit strange at first, but you know,
But it's strangely familiar in terms of being similar to Catholicism, ritual at least.
Similar, but in Catholicism, even the hymns are kind of appeals to God. Here, it's very explicit. The chanting is just chanting. So it has a different tone in some ways.
The way we explain that difference in interfaith circles and with students coming here for comparative religion, which we have a lot of visits, is that our ritual protocols are not really worship. They're more teachings from India, China, Japan that we repeat and out of the, some people said 84,000 sutras in India alone, out of the mass of teachings that have accumulated through the 2,500 years of Buddhism, certain ones have been selected for liturgy. And Soto's liturgy is slightly different from Rinzai and the other sects, and probably, the Vipassana or the Theravadan school probably has different ones and so forth. But I'm personally very engaged or interested in why were these particular ones chosen out of everything that they could have put in the liturgy. So I think it's the main teachings that they said, this is something that should be repeated daily or weekly or however often in monasteries and where monks and nuns are training, so that the repetition alone sort of begins to implant this in your mind, and you begin to hear what it's actually saying. Now, of course, when we chant in Japanese, we don't know what it's saying. But my teacher, Matsuoka Roshi, said, the chanting, as you said, is the meaning of the chanting.
Yeah.
And yet there's content there. The content is more teaching than hymns to Buddha. They're not hymns to Buddha. So it's an interesting insight you have there. So how long have you been practicing with us? Do you recall?
Seriously, since maybe October or November. I, would show up every once in a while before then. But
Yep. So you've been coming for a year or so, or a couple of years, and just recently. What has brought about change in your practice where you are now coming more regularly? What brings you back, and how and why is your practice intensifying?
It's I don't know exactly why. It just kind of before I would meditate for a while and it would help a little, but I would something usually grad school demands would yank me away, and I would fail to make time for it. And then once you're kind of all stressed out about something and frantically moving all the time, it can be a little bit uncomfortable to really sit and be still. But I don't know. I at some point hit sort of a critical mass where I was doing it consistently enough. You really do start to notice something. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's a difference. I'm less like just stressed out and angry all the time. And
So during the process of, are you in semesters at Emory or quarters or?
semesters technically, but in grad school those cease to have meaning.
So I was wondering if there's any kind of seasonality to it where the pressure's on I remember in design school, we had these semester ending charrettes where we would just stay up all night working, getting the work ready for the exhibits, right? Because that was, your grade was going to be dependent on that. There was a lot of work that you had not gotten done that you're expected to do. Is it like that? Do you get into this pressure kind of situation where toward the end of the time period, all the papers are due and you're sort of up against the wall?
They kind of stick you in lab and give you a project and the rest is completely up to you. You know, it takes years to complete and you're just kind of done when you're done. There's really no rhythm to it.
That's great, but that can also be kind of disorienting, right?
Yeah,
You have to establish your own discipline.
yeah.
And how does your Zen practice fit into that picture of we in Zen we say discipline is self-discipline. We don't impose discipline on people.
No.
Zen is misunderstood that way. I think people think you come to a Zen temple and they make you do this, they make you do this, make you do that. But the strongest discipline, at least from our perspective, is that is self-imposed.
Mhm.
Do you find that? Have you found any ways that you could talk about that the Zen practice has affected you in that regard?
The discipline certainly is a component. I mean, the greatest change that it's affected me professionally, though, has been like I've been pretty burnt out in graduate school for a long time. It's pretty common, and that's where I noticed the biggest difference. You know, the discipline of just getting on the mat and doing it definitely does play a component because you have to show up in lab and just get it done.
So are you
Yeah.
saying that you're personally experiencing less burnout?
Yeah, um, it can be kind of an isolating, difficult place to work, and the academic system itself is full of inconsistencies. But it's just less. I get less wrapped up in that stuff and more, okay, I'm here, I'm now, I have work to do, I can concentrate.
In the press, there's an awful lot on student discontent, student isolation, loneliness. Even though everybody's connected through social media, it has an isolating effect as well, the flip side of it. What do you witness in your fellow students in that regard? Do you see a lot of that kind of thing going on, or?
Yeah, there's literature out there suggesting, and this number is almost certainly inflated, but one study found 6 times greater incidence of anxiety and depression in grad students compared to the normal population. That's from like a self-reporting survey, right? So depressed people might be more likely to. But let's say the number is 3 times. That's still a lot.
And anecdotally, amongst your personal friends, do you see a lot of that kind of stress?
Yeah. It's pretty common. It's even seen as kind of a normal, almost rite of passage type thing in grad school, which is a little bit absurd. But
we've had people in practice here who come in and said to our private interview, Doka-san, that we do teacher-student, I got a promotion. I was promoted at work today. And I was promoted because one of the reasons is because I'm so good at getting people to work together. He said, that's not me. I'm the troublemaker. So we have this phenomenon that we've seen where through several years of Zen practice, a person changes in ways that they don't actually know themselves. They're unaware of it themselves, but people around them see it. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how you feel about your fellow students. Have they said anything like that to you? What, you're not losing your head, or the rest of us are going crazy? What's wrong with you?
No, I mean I've been kind of railing against the established order for a while now. I don't know if anybody else has remarked on it, but I certainly feel just less like stressed out about being a graduate student and what's the PhD going to mean? I don't know.
So for people in your situation, undergraduate as well as graduate, and I know there's a lot of stress in the undergraduate level too, what would you tell them about Zen, or what would you recommend to them around this practice that you've taken up? If anything, I mean.
Yeah, I would recommend it in general. This is there is a lot of kind of talk and lip service in grad school and elsewhere about the power of meditation, and mostly you find a very kind of stripped down secular version of meditation or mindfulness training kind of offered. Zen is kind of the natural evolution of that for me. It's kind of one step deeper into that practice.
Have you done any other kind of meditation before Zen, or?
Not really. Mostly just seated zazen.
Because we typically, those of us in Zen propagation think of it the same way, that it's stripped down, it's as simple as, but it's in the deep end of the pool kind of thing, rather than popular versions of mindfulness, be here now, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The power of now.
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff that you see on the press. So anything we haven't talked about that you feel is important?
I can't think of anything right now.
Well, let me ask you a kind of a technical question.
Yeah.
Zen is reputed to have the power to integrate whatever areas you're working in. Some of the greatest philosophers, scientists, and so forth have used meditation to penetrate deeper into their specialty or to the understanding. There's a book called Higher Creativity that you may have heard of, where he talks about hypnagogic, hypnopompic states, half asleep, half awake, before and after going to sleep, and how creativity sort of flows. Your mind is very uninhibited in those states. And we think something like that occurs in Zen meditation. One of the scientists who discovered the benzene molecule had kind of a half-awake dream about it, a snake biting its tail, and he sort of saw the shape of it. But of course, he was programming his own mind with all of the information he'd studied, and so it didn't just come as a vision from heaven or anything. It was more based on his studies. So can you say anything about, and it may be too early for you to have seen any connection, but the connection between meditation and the science you're studying? Obviously, neuroscience is very intimately embedded in Zen and vice versa. But have you begun to see any potential for sort of gaining insight into neuroscience through meditation?
It's a little bit early for me to say. I definitely see the potential. I feel a little more almost rested mentally when I take the time and I'm, really consistent about sitting. I think you've described it to me that way as well.
Yeah, we think of it as working a muscle. You don't keep the muscle in tension constantly, but in college you typically do, and you get to where you can't really think. Realize. So it needs to be given a rest once in a while. This think, the discriminating mind, chitta, and the intuitive mind or bodhi, wisdom mind, is very important in science as well as the arts. But you can't teach that, right? I mean, that can't be taught.
Yeah.
And so what can be taught is what the universities emphasize.
Yeah.
And there's so much of it that you get overloaded with it, and you're way over here on the side of analytical. And thank you. Yeah, analytical side of the mind, and the intuitive side of the mind is sort of pushed into the background.
Yeah.
So your comment about being rested, I think, is also that balance that can start to come back into place.
Yeah, scientists, it just as a group, overwhelmingly emphasize with the intellect, the analytical minds. They've spent their entire careers kind of polishing it to a fine edge.
And many people think of Zen as being anti-intellectual, because we teach non-thinking or not relying on thinking, which seems very antithetical to the culture and to science in particular. But it's for the same reason you mentioned, that if you know how to stop thinking, or you can be conscious, engaged, et cetera, without having to rely on thinking, then when you need to think, you can really think.
Yeah. And
that's the theory anyway.
I think it holds up. I do. And I think even more importantly, the analytical mind is not where empathy comes from. It's not where kind of our deeper sensibilities come from, and it's very easy. The scientists as a class are excellent, good moral people, but it's very easy to become so wrapped up in your own logic or your own intellect that the empathetic parts of you calcify a little bit.
I follow these sort of public journals like Scientific American, Science News, New York Times Science section. And there was a lot of press about the fact that the scientist unknowingly harbors biases about what they're practicing and studying. And that naturally is natural human nature. But it seems to go so far that they have been able to show by doing studies around this that a particular scientist cannot even see the data that contradicts their primary bias in the study. And so that's where Master Dogen uses the term the backward step. The backward step, I think, means something like, and turning the light back around on yourself, that kind of thing. I think it means being able to step back in our conventional way of thinking about that, and seeing more the big picture. And so being able to step back away from our own biases and blinders that we may be wearing.
It's, the heart of and soul of science. It's supposed to be the kind of objectivity that the scientist is supposed to be able to bring to the table. In science, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the getting the next grant, getting the next paper. It's a brutal business. And, I think there's a ton of bias just because of the scarcity mindset.
The whole idea of objectivity and subjectivity is an interesting one around Buddhism, because Buddhism does not try to paint a picture of reality without the observer. Starting with Buddha, the observer was fully included in the equation right from the beginning. So now science has come up against the uncertainty principle that measuring it changes it, and that we observe it changes it, and so forth. So you can't really extract the observer from the equation fundamentally. But that goes to the psychological things we're talking about, where if the scientist can see himself or herself in the equation, then perhaps it would be a way to see around the blindness of the bias. So anything you'd like to say before we turn to questions from the audience? Anything further?
No, I think that just about covers anything I can think of. Yeah.
Good. Well, let's turn to the audience. Let's see if anybody has a question for you you'd like to bring up tonight.
Question here. You found, I have a kid probably about your age, and it seems that everything is moving so fast. When I speak to her, she just is so caught up in the veracity and the fastness. Do you find that meditation has helped you kind of slow that down, or what's been your experience with that? And just because I hear you talking about being in grad school, everything is just coming at you all at once. Can you kind of speak to what that, how meditation kind of helped you be able to kind of slow things down, or at least see the kind of speed of things?
Yeah, I think definitely in science, and I think in American society in general, there's kind of a cult of productivity where your worth as a human being is measured in output of some kind. And it's tremendously unhealthy, because I think that idea leads to the logical conclusion that if you ever sit down and rest, you're wasting your life. And Zen, at least for me, gives me a very powerful kind of counter narrative to that. Sitting down and staying silent is kind of this radical act in American society, but it's we as humans, I think, need that. We need to slow down, and ignoring that, it's like an off-balanced centrifuge in the lab that shakes itself apart. That's unstable. So yeah, definitely.
Good question. I think Zen points to this idea that we need to slow down, but we can also come to a full stop. one of the old sayings is Buddha stopped the sun in the sky. So it's kind of an extreme position on that, if you can bring it all to a halt and kind of start over fresh. So anyone else?
I have a question. So you talked about sort of the two steps that led you into Zen. So you found meditation through sort of scientific literature, and then you're watching Alan Watts videos. And I was wondering, like, what's the moment that leads you to just watching Alan Watts videos? Like, how did you find?
It was a song, actually. It was like an EDM song I was listening to in lab, and they sampled Alan Watts saying like crazy stuff about time. I was like, who is this guy? Like, he sounds so British and amazing. And so then I looked him up. Yeah, it was completely random. And yeah, this place like is literally blocks away from my house. So from there it was 2 + 2. Yeah.
We have a collection of his talks in the library on tape, or I don't know what medium they're on, but my brother was a fan of his and gave me his collection of Alan Watts talks. So, anyone else?
Yeah, similar to kind of piggyback on what you just asked is, it seems like it was later in your life that all of a sudden this interest with meditation came up, and then a little deeper happening. Did you notice anything before that you were drawn to? Like I felt like mine started when I was like 15, questioning in a way that science didn't answer, and my parents didn't answer, and the pastor didn't answer, but it was in me that kind of. Is there something you identify earlier on?
So yes and no. I've always been drawn to kind of the stuff I'm learning in church. Kind of makes sense, but I don't know if it completely answers my questions. The way you're kind of expected to live is a little bit weird. I thought science could answer those questions until graduate school, and then I kind of realized like, oh no, that's not something it can really do. And so Zen is kind of the next step of that process.
I've got another manuscript that I thought I was going to try to publish first, but it's on the back shelf for now. And in that I profile Zen as the middle way between the extremes of rationalism or science and theism or religion on both ends. So you have prayer in religion, you have experiment in science, and you have meditation in Zen.
Yeah.
So the first part of that was about there's a rank of 8 different things, and one is what question do they ask, right? And the way I profiled it is religion and philosophy basically ask the why questions, that usually cannot be answered with rational evidence-based answers. They're more beliefs and theories and so forth. Science asks the how questions. How does it work? How did it come about? And sometimes that's mixed up with why. If you say, why did the bridge fall down? Well, they have all these answers, and they typically are how answers, actually.
Right.
So if you think of science as answering the how, then what question does Zen answer or address? And so my answer is what? What is this that thus comes is one of the famous sayings from Zen. What is this? Enmo, it. Enmo is Japanese for it, thus that, pointing at the ineffable. What? What is it? What is this?
No, I've always been interested in that. I guess that's what originally drew me. Like we have in my lab these preserved human brains that we loan out to education, teachers and stuff. Students can poke them, but you look at this kind of unimpressive looking lump of gray stuff, and that was a human being. That was it, a human mind.
More computing power potentially than our best computers so far.
Yeah.
One other question is, we throw around Zen practice. And I was just wondering what that meant to you,
Practice.
practice. How does it, how would you define it in your life?
I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around that. It starts with the zazen, but it doesn't end with the zazen. And I don't exactly know where it ends. I think there's probably no end to it. I think, what I've noticed is that the zazen is kind of gives you an awareness, which is a little bit of a foundation for everything else. So Zen practice, I don't really think I could pin it down if I tried.
I guess in a sense, I'm just thinking when a person says, I practice Zen,
Mhm.
there's a certain form to that, whether it be sitting at home in the morning or attending the Zen center or whatever. I mean, how does that look as far as in your life?
I come here when I can, and I spend 20 minutes on the cushion at home in the morning if I can. Sometimes less if I've overslept, which is frequently.
Practice has this interesting connotation of rehearsal, like you're rehearsing for the real thing. So, and then you have to ask, what am I practicing for again?
Like practicing medicine or practicing law. Like, when do you actually get around to it?
Yeah, the real thing. And a lot of old Zen masters say, why don't you just go directly to it? What? Anything online? Okay, good. So, well, we went a little bit over. Anything in the back? Yeah. Well, thank you again, Mr.
Thank you.
Master Flaherty, I should say. Do you have your wand with you?
No. Left it at home.
You're becoming a wizard of neuroscience. We appreciate your taking the time to do this and sharing your path to date, path du jour, with the audience.
Thanks very much.
I wish you the best of luck in
Thank
your endeavors. I would love to at least maybe get the abstract of your thesis when it's done and read that. That would be interesting.
I will send it to you. Yeah.
Please join us again. So while we're here, do we want to talk a little bit about the schedule before we break up? How many are going to be here in the morning?